Kyle Stewart, welcome to the Preconstruction podcast.
Hey, I'm glad to be on here. Thanks for having me, Gareth.
You're welcome. If we've had a little bit of a break on the podcast, we're back with a bang. So Kyle is senior manager of estimating or project estimating at Exyte. So in Houston, Texas, excited to get you on. We're going to be talking about a lot of things today. Obviously, Kyle's journey from maths teacher to senior manager within an EPC firm. So that has taken, the journey's been incredible. One of the things we're going to talk about is he has earned a certification from AACE. So usually a lot of people ask us about the ASPE certification. This is one that I want to get in to with you. Then your passion for estimating, how estimating has evolved, of course, technology within estimating, then managing cost uncertainty, and then communicating that kind of escalating project cost to stakeholders, and then finishing with the challenges of the compressed design and construction timelines within semiconductor construction. So lots to get through. For anybody that doesn't know you, Kay, let's go back to the very start. When you were a kid, what was the influence for getting into construction, or when did the penny drop for the construction industry?
No, that's a great question. And actually, I had a little bit of a unique childhood where my dad worked in oil and gas. And so I actually grew up in Saudi Arabia. My dad worked for Saudi Aramco, spent my childhood there. And so everything I understood about projects and, that sort of thing was centered around oil. And naturally, once that time ended, we moved to Houston. And so that's really, I guess, where I would say would start. And so going into college, I started with an engineering degree and actually ended up with an applied mathematics degree because just a change of focus and direction where I wanted to go. And so coming out of college, I was like, okay, great, let's get a career started in oil and gas. That's kind of what I know, I understand. Unfortunately, it was a downturn in the oil and gas industry, and I got told a lot of, hey, that applied math degree is a great technical degree. We're not hiring anybody fresh out of college and somebody who's not strictly an engineering degree at this time. And so, like you mentioned, I went ahead and discovered teaching for a couple of years. I taught high school math, trigonometry, calculus, that sort of thing. Opportunity came up to kind of get back into engineering or into EPC companies, and I got involved with project controls. And what was great, the company I was working at that time is that they had a rotation program within project controls. And so I started in estimating. Had somebody in there who was starting to mentor me. Here's the basics of project controls, estimating. After a year or two, rotated into kind of scheduling, earned value arena. As I was on a project for that, another downturn happened another 5 years later. And so my boss said, hey, come back to estimating. We've got projects for you to work on. And ultimately, I just ended up deciding to stay there. I really do. I enjoy it, the challenge, the kind of projects that it brings, the involvement within the whole, engineering, procurement, construction phases, and so on. But I mean, all in all, I would say I've definitely been blessed throughout my career. I've had a lot of great people. I'd say 15 years ago, if you asked me where I was going to be, I could not guess today, the position I'm in where, I'm a manager kind of leading estimates on big projects that are, the projects honestly just blow my mind. But I've had a lot of great people who've brought me along, mentored me, taught me, believed in me to, to take that next step. And so, yeah, that's kind of about where I'm at now.
That's what I love about the pre-construction podcast. It's everyone has got a different background and a different story to how and I hate saying it, but they fell into pre-construction or estimating because like Europe, they don't have the education program to bring through quantity surveyors. So everybody's got that unique story. I love as well that the shout outs, don't be afraid to name people because a lot of people that maybe now at this stage, they will be leaving our industry, a lot of great leaders. So it's really important that we acknowledge the work that they've done, and trying to get all that information from them before they leave is vital important.
Yeah, definitely for sure. I'd say actually at my current job, I was coming out of oil and gas and stepping into the advanced technology facilities, and a lot of it's transferable, right? But there's still unique systems that, like water filtering systems, clean rooms that I had to learn very quickly. And so my boss at the time, Jared Edinger, he brought me in and took me alongside him, and I probably called him twice a day for the first year. I mean, he was very patient with me, but eventually, got comfortable with it, and And he's moved on to a different company, and I've got a great boss now who's kind of picked up where that left off, and he's trying to shape me, into my next role, advancing my career. He's about 20 years my senior, and so he's closer to retirement, and he's like, hey, I see a lot of me and you. I want to keep guiding you in that direction, and so you can be successful.
Wonderful. We're in great gratitude for people like that in our industry. It's so important. Talk to me now about your career. Obviously, you got your teeth into project controls, you got your teeth into estimating. In 2022, you went for the certification through AACE International. Talk to us about the thought process before you did that, and then talk to us about the certification.
Okay. Yeah. I'd say about 8 to 10 years of my career where I got my feet wet in project controls and estimating. There was a point where I was like, okay, I need to keep growing, keep expanding. If you look at my resume, you'll see I switched companies, mainly trying to kind of spread my wings. And so part of that too is I was like, okay, let me earn a certification, fill in the gaps that I just haven't learned on the job or from people that have taught me. And so that's where that certification came to play. That was about the time of the downturn during COVID, where projects kind of shut down, slowed down. I was working at a plant where they're like, okay, we need to take a look at our capital, kind of adjust to everything going around economically. And so started getting into that. Now ACE, it's much like ASPE, where it's more focused around advancing cost engineering. But of course, estimating goes right alongside that. They have scheduling recommended practices. I think they get into risk quite a bit. And so I thought, hey, great. It'd be great to have that CEP at the end of my title. And so went through it's like I'd say about 9 months of just studying, the materials that I have, making sure I understand all the terminology, the techniques, approaches to things. And then there's about a 5 hour test taken to prove that knowledge, right? And so since then, of course, I passed the test, obviously, since I have the certification. And but it's not just about having that certification; it's about contributing back to the industry. Where depending on how much you want to get involved or how little, there's various conferences, meetings that they have. There's personally what I do, and this helps me get my recertification, is I like to grade the memorandums that are included in the exam. And so once a month, they'll send me about 2 or 3 where I'll go through and say, yeah, that aligns with, estimating methodologies and practices, that sort of thing. And so it's not just all it take. There's a lot of give too. And just trying to, my personal view is I want to grow my career, but everybody around me, have that same expectation where they're trying to grow, trying to get better at what they do, because that naturally just makes our team better and makes, estimating as a whole and much more respectable.
Good, good. I love it because the one thing that we're learning now is the evolution of estimating, project controls, scheduling, risk, price escalation. Tell me how it's evolved for you. I mean, you've been in it now for quite a while. How has it been for you? How have you seen it evolve? And what excites you, and also what are you afraid of a little bit?
Okay. Yeah. So when I came into estimating, that was, I would say, kind of in the transferring from the Excel workbook era into estimating software, right? And so, and honestly, a lot of the chief estimators that I worked with who were close to retirement when I was starting, they were like, "Oh yeah, I remember doing things back on pen and paper, back in the old days where you had to know exactly what you're doing." And I'm like, "Okay, that's great, but that's not what I have to do right now." And I mean, I'd love to have that knowledge. It's much like when you talk to a photographer nowadays. You've got the guys who are used to the 35 millimeter film, and people are using Adobe Photoshop and even AI now to, produce those different types of photos. And so, personally, I feel like I've always been a technology or software's always come a little bit easy to me. Give me a week or two of training, and I can get up and running in it. Understand the basics. But when it comes down to it, software is a tool, right? It's a way to organize an estimate. All the different ones out there do it a little differently, some a little bit better than others, and honestly, I think what we're looking a lot into now is how the workflow is best, not just with an estimating, but that flow of cost to our cost engineering team, flow of hours to our scheduling team, even procurement as we load up all of our materials, equipment, as making sure that transfers, so we're not having to basically export translate it and re-export. Especially on these mega projects where it's moving fast. There's a lot of data to move. That becomes very critical. And so right now our company is kind of in a phase where we're looking at new software that we can use globally, and that where we'll have a global metric database available within the software to help with that. Now, the thing that scares me, and I know this is a little bit of a topic nowadays, is AI, right? And um, I'm cautious is basically where I stand on this. And the reason for that is I think it does a lot of great things. It's advancing very quickly. For me, data integrity is super critical. When you have 30,000 lines of data, you got to make sure it's correct. And while AI can handle that, personally, I just don't have the confidence yet. So I'm starting small. We're using things like Copilot, with emails and Outlook, and maybe helping build a table or a presentation, that sort of thing. One thing we are looking into, so we use Bluebeam for our takeoffs, and they've introduced a beta testing program of using AI for overlaying revisions of drawings, where it can red line or yellow line point out, what changed and give you a little bit of a summary instead of you having to sit there with two screens going back and forth trying to pick out exactly what's different. I mean, I know there's an overlay feature as well, which helps, but it takes out a lot of that user process and automates it to where you're not spending an hour trying to do that. It's done in 1 minute, and then you can spend the time, analyzing and updating estimates accordingly.
Yeah, it's an interesting one. There's a webinar we're holding coming up soon, AI and pre-construction, and everyone is at a different stage of the AI journey, and it's interesting to hear everyone's feedback. I think there is a little bit of fear, but it's interesting to everyone is kind of focused on a different stage of the pre-construction or estimating life cycle. Is there any stage that you would think, you know what? I would be more confident if AI had a look at that and help me with that particular part of estimating because there would be less risk. I would be more confident. What's your feel on it? Where do you think AI could really help you, or where you would like it to help you?
Well, I mentioned workflows. Automation's big, and I think it can really do a lot of that. Now you've got to have different softwares, whether that's through Excel, making sure that that talks right. I'd say we spend a lot of time in setup as well, right? So we try to create templates and set up our estimates. It's dependent on what stage you're in. I've had the opportunity in my career to be all the way from an early conceptual type estimate to being on a project where we're developing forecast estimates, for bid evaluations and such. And so, um, but at its root, an estimate still needs to be set up. And so, things like setting up your wage rates, building up crews, the type that needs to go in there, saying, okay, hey AI, can you give me a 6-to-1 ratio of foreman to crew? Maybe include one labor in each. That sort of thing. Same things with like labor productivity, doing analysis and such. I think risk analysis, to think about that is big too. We run Monte Carlo simulations, which are require big heavy data running it through the simulation. I haven't seen it yet, but I'm interested to see if AI can be used in that. Just because my personal experience with trying to put risk around an estimate and cost.
Yeah, and funny that brings us nicely to the next point as well. It's the uncertainty of cost right now. I mean that is where the risk is. Um, Communicating that price escalation or project costs to the client and the subcontractor. I know it's a big part of everyone's, but particularly you got a real passion for it. How do you guys go about it at Exyte?
So I put this as where we're in a little bit of a tough spot in the industry where pre-COVID, everything I learned, early in my career is okay. Escalation averages 2 to 3%. That's been stable for the past 20 years, right? We get into COVID, costs are going all over the place. We see copper, aluminum increasing right now, steel times. We're seeing longer lead times on equipment. Kind of to the thought of everybody wants to build a facility right now. We're all looking for the same equipment, the chillers, the pumps, the air handler units. It's becoming a challenge, and so inherently there's costs that are just that are going to go along with that. Add to that things like announcements around tariffs. There's things around the deportations where there's been some analysis that I've seen. I won't say they're solidified yet, but that there is going to be a shortage in our trades because of some of that, immigration and how that gets into, construction trades. And so, but then everybody just fighting for the same trades too, right? So whether you look at that down in, or, over in Arizona, down in Texas, there's data centers being built, there's semiconductor facilities, add in oil and gas down here on the Gulf Coast too. Everybody wants an electrician. Everybody wants a pipe fitter, pipe welder, right? So, pouring concrete too. And so naturally that creates a higher demand for those, and more than the supply has. You're going to have to pay those guys more because they're going to go where, they're paying $20 more or something like that. And we've seen this on one of the recent projects I was on where, um, the state that we were in, we had outstretched the union that was there. And so we were having to go to neighboring states, which, the union that was there, they were stating that, hey, we got to make them the foreman, pay them an extra 10 or $15 to match, or to make, to have them paid more than what the guys coming from the next state are. And so, so in other words, wage rates is or labor costs is a big, driver there too. But then just, following the past few years of escalation, right after COVID, we saw up to 15 to 20%, depending on which industry you're looking at, right? From what I've seen, it's stabilizing out to about 4 or 5%. That's still more than the 2 or 3% from years ago. And so I've gotten in situations recently where, I put an estimate out there for a full facility. It's conceptual, and so no very little technical data, just basically saying, hey, this is what we've seen. And these are companies that have built facilities, over the past 10, 20 years in different countries, and even in the US. And they're just, it raises some eyebrows. They're like, are you sure? Because we built this facility, about 5 years ago, and it was, you're sitting for, more expensive. And I'm like, I wish I could give you better news, but unfortunately, I'm trying to be realistic with you, right? There's a reality to this. I, I don't want to get in a situation where, um, we're just having to change order everything, or our company's at a loss. Again, it comes back to risk and how to handle that risk, how to communicate it. So everybody from, your engineers who are in the weeds all the way up to your CEOs can clearly understand what that money is buying, and what the costs we're putting in front of them includes.
Yeah, it's interesting that you go into two particular types of costs there, the labor and the equipment, or the products that you need and the building materials. Out of the two of them, which do you think is going to be the biggest challenge moving forward?
So I'd say labor.
Yeah.
I think, as I said, just as that huge draw for labor to, hands-on tools, that has to be done. There's things within, depending on how advanced or, your procurement division is, there can be workarounds, right? And so material, we can communicate to the client, hey, if you pay a little more, we can hopefully shorten the duration. If we communicate that we need to get onto long lead, procurement very early on in the process, then the client understands, okay, there's some critical path here that needs to be mitigated, right? But labor, it's once you get into that project and trying to bring in, you know, we have work packages that still require 200 people, sometimes 300, 400 people just to build. And that's one of, maybe 30 or 40 work packages. And so it's, some of these projects you end up having 3,000 to maybe 5,000, people on one site. And if you're in Arizona, there's TSMC there. You're fighting for, there people that are going over there. If you know that there's, Facebook and, Tesla, Google have all announced major projects too, which they've got deep pockets, and so they can naturally have that little bit of flexibility to make sure they're getting, the services that they're paying for.
Yeah. Does that come into it when the client obviously is selecting the site for the role and the time? I mean, can they look into it and do a kind of a resources analysis of existing projects right now and maybe see a sort of a gap where Tesla or Facebook is finishing the project at this time? It would be best if we started at this time just purely because of resources.
And honestly, it's dependent on the client, right? So if it's a client where they have a facility, either they're expanding, they have a headquarters, kind of a general area that they want to stay in, then yeah, that does lock in, the location. Now we do have some clients that we work with where we provide those studies of, okay, if you move over here, here's the situation. Like, while there's a lot of, projects going to remote areas, that's where it does become a challenge because depending on the state, non-union, union, how they pull from their trades, how much travelers you can bring in, because bringing travelers too naturally raises cost, right? You have to pay per diem, and so a lot of these projects are also offering a project labor agreement, that includes trade incentives, and so but yes, if we have the opportunity, we do a location analysis to kind of give them the best view. And even some of these companies are looking at, maybe in their home country versus the U.S., as there tends to be a lot of Asian companies looking to build in the U.S. So yeah.
Brilliant. And you mentioned something there about the schedule. I mean, obviously the schedule is critical for some of these, especially the AI boom when it comes to mission critical projects. What are you seeing from the client point of view? Is it a case of, listen, the schedule is more important than the cost, or is there a mixture of both? What's the general consensus?
Yeah, well, that there's the triangle of projects. There's the cost, the schedule, and quality. And you can only have two of those is the kind of the common saying. And I think that holds true. You really can't keep all three in a tight spot. But the problem is I mean, I view it as a race to build chips and data, right? And so you got to have the chips to build the data centers. And so we're seeing short durations on RFPs where we used to have maybe 6 to 8 weeks. Now we're looking at 2 to 3 weeks where we have to turn around, a cost schedule strategy, full proposal for how we're going to execute this work. And so I'd say on recent projects, we're seeing where we're getting pushed on to keep costs low and keep schedule aggressive, and of course keep the quality right. You don't want to have issues with welds, pipe installations, concrete cracking, that kind of stuff. And so it's a very careful balance. We've got to have a lot of good quality people in there just to make sure we're on top of it. But I'd also say it's very important for a company to have proper approaches and procedures, not go into this blindly, where they can clearly communicate these to the company. And I think one thing we're seeing a lot of too, it's not just the project people on the projects that are listening to these, right? You have C-level, CEOs, CFOs listening to their major projects that they're spending billions of dollars on. And so it's being able to communicate upwards what's going on with the project. There's and that's where I believe change management comes really into play, making sure it's clearly communicated. Because if there's anything that's inherent to a project is change, and so being able to handle that appropriately as the things are moving out to the field, being built, and keeping to the promised milestones and deadlines.
Yeah, funny you say that about the whole transition from pre-con estimating the price over to the operations side. Obviously, everybody does it different. Nobody's got this magical process or workflow. How do you guys do it at Exyte? How does it go from pre-con to operations?
So from pre-con to operations, so by that time we've typically had a budget set, right? We've communicated budget to the client, and so going into that pre-con phase, I would say so we're not set up where we necessarily have pre-construction managers, right? I know some companies function that way, but we more function a way uh, where construction management typically owns the scope. Estimating is looking at the costs according to that scope, and then we're working in hand with our procurement teams to bring in contractors and get them under contract to start building, right? And so from the very beginning, that there's key design that we make sure is set, key procurement items that we're starting to procure. Of course, your CSA trades are going to be on the front end, your earthwork, your concrete, getting that out to the field, and then gradually moving your way into your process of mechanical and electrical and control systems. And so um, it's a challenge. If schedules squeeze, there's very tight windows between. You've got to have that design available right before you can do anything procurement, updating costs and so on. And so making sure that that's set and ready, so then we can move into the next phase and of effectively evaluating the contractors and then letting them go and let build as designed.
Brilliant. You mentioned there as well, obviously you're in the estimating team, you've got a procurement team. One thing that you will have seen as well, having worked in the oil and gas industry with Jacobs, is how focused on the schedule that oil and gas is as an industry. We're starting to see that creep into the commercial, the data center, the mission critical, the semiconductor market. Do you think that's a good thing? And do you guys have a separate scheduling team, or is that something that you look after at Exyte?
And we do have a separate scheduling and planning team, just because of the nature of the size of projects, right? So it's a scalability where naturally, if you're on smaller projects, you want to minimize the size of your team. So, estimator may do scheduling and earn value all in the same breath, and cost control. But because we're having to have so many people involved, we make sure we have focused teams on these efforts. And so, um, I would say I understand why schedules is starting to get more aggressive. The reason behind it, talking about just trying to be first to market, trying to have that available for the market, so you get that big chunk of share and profit, right? These clients are very much looking at, okay, what's our ROI on this, and how fast can we get that ROI? And so that goes back to the triangle I was talking about, just getting to that point. And so we're having to try to support that very quickly. But all in all, it's a challenge. It's we have data centers where we're seeing year-long durations, which are typically a little bit longer. And even working with international clients too, that's some discussions that we have where naturally in the U.S. with our safety protocols, permitting, just typical ways of working, our projects are typically a few months longer than you see over maybe a Southeast Asia country or a European country.
Very good, interesting. And what excites you now, Kyle, to kind of, especially in the semiconductor world, or advanced technology manufacturing, what excites you about the future? Is there anything particular that stands out to be saying, once once that happens, or once we go in that direction, things will be a little bit easier. We'll be able to build quicker, more quality, at a better pace, essentially. What excites you for the future?
So, like I mentioned, I came out of oil and gas and eventually made the switch. And, I grind my teeth in oil and gas, and that's where I learned how to do things. And, um, but I would say the advanced technology facility kind of clicks a little more for me, that there's things that make more sense. The projects to me are a little bit more exciting just because of, um, just the scale and the complexity of what's going into building these. And because this industry is just growing like crazy, a lot of people that we're having to hire and bring in come from other industries, a lot of it from oil and gas. We get some from commercial, hospitals, residential, depending who can do the job, right? And so what I'm excited about is getting, as the education grows within industry and how to run these projects, how they're going to become better run, how there's going to be much more of a knowledge and education around these projects, because I think everybody's just trying to figure it out right now. Now, there's some companies who have figured out they do it great. They have a way of doing it. Exyte has a long history of doing that, right? We've been very much in the clean room space, the semiconductor facilities globally. And so I'm very blessed to be on the team I'm on, and the number of very intelligent people that I can reach out to. There's just something that within my experience I don't quite understand yet. So I think there's a lot of building for the next 10 years, and just seeing these facilities built. I'm interested to see how, with the power demand and water demand for these facilities, is going to impact our infrastructure, at least in the U.S. As there's a big pull that in Texas we struggle with a dated infrastructure that can't handle all these facilities that are pulling megawatts of of energy. And so part of some of the designs we're starting to see come out is building energy production facilities with the facility itself.
Yeah, that's I mean, the power one obviously gets all the kind of the media attention and the attention of the administration, but the water side is critical. I mean, already the water is a quite aging infrastructure within the US. You can see that in the projects. Before a water project would be 50, 60 million. You're now looking at water projects that are 250, 300 million. They're just getting bigger and more expensive, and more complex because they're old facilities. Wonderful, Kyle. This has been really insightful. A real good insight into semiconductor construction, the challenges, the complexities. If there is anybody listening now and saying, you know what, really enjoyed that about Kyle, would love to connect with him, just kind of share some ideas or ask a question, where's the best place to get you?
I say LinkedIn. That's how we got connected. That's a great network just for professionals. Um, search my name, Kyle Stewart. I'll be happy to answer anything you have and
Absolutely.
create any discussions. Yeah.
Yeah, and if anybody's interested, I will put Kyle's LinkedIn profile link in the show notes as well, so you can access it pretty easily. Kyle, again, thank you very much. Looking forward to following you at Exyte, and all the best for the rest of 2026.
All right. Thank you, Gareth. I appreciate you having me on and having this chat with me. Really good talking to you.